So I'll begin with just a very brief introduction of our panelists, and then I'll allow them to tell their story of how they chose the institution that they're currently working at, and maybe a little bit of how they got there. So first we have Casper, whom you've all met from the panel, or I suppose those that were there. And I'll just say that she has her PhD in human genetics and is currently an assistant professor of biology at Eastern Michigan University. And then to her left, we have Professor Monique Ward. She has a PhD in psychology from the University of California in Los Angeles. And she is a Thurnau professor of psychology here at the University of Michigan. And then next to Monique, we have Dr. Amar Basu, and he has a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Michigan. He is the assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering and biomedical engineering at Wayne State University. So thank you all for coming. So again, tell us a little bit about the institution that you work at and maybe why you chose to go to that institution. And if it makes sense to sort of frame, like, what are your general duties within the position that you have?
Okay, sure. In terms of general duties at Eastern, we'll start and go back. This is a comprehensive regional institution. It really is half research, half teaching. You are expected to get external funding for your research in the sciences. There's a little bit of funding internally, but it's not enough to really run a lab on your own. So the teaching at Eastern, it's 12 contact hours a semester, which could potentially equate to teaching 4 courses a semester. It rarely does. Most of the time you're buying out of courses, for example, by getting external funding, or courses will count double if they're large or if it's your first time, these kinds of things. So I actually really only maybe teach somewhere in the range of between 6 and 9 contact hours a semester. The why I chose Eastern, I was very interested in teaching. I did teaching as a graduate student here because it's required as part of the human genetics program, and I loved it. It was wonderful. I truly enjoyed it. And I then did a lot of the CRLT events while I was here and further explored the possibility and thought, okay, yes, this is really what I want to do. So for my postdoc, I chose to do a teaching research combo postdoc, and that's the SPIRE postdoctoral fellowship at UNC. There's a lot of those out there now, so be happy to talk more about that too if you want to hear about it. But that allowed then the dual training, and I still really liked teaching and research after I was done with the postdoc, and applied only to liberal arts institutions or comprehensive universities. I didn't apply to places like U of M, just wasn't what I was looking for. And through all the interviews, I would say that Eastern stood out for a couple of reasons. One being we like this area. We lived here before. We have some family here. The feel of the department was good. I liked the colleagues here, so just the fit seemed right. And I liked the way that they talked about how you can work with your schedule to make teaching and research all happen at Eastern. So they seemed to understand the kinds of things you needed to do to be able to do both. So that was among the offers I had. I felt that was a good fit, basically.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm a psychologist, and I specialize in developmental psychology. Is anyone here in the social sciences? Okay, I was trained as a developmental psychologist at UCLA, and always assumed I would go in and do research. I loved research. Teaching I liked it, but it was challenging and scary. So I always assumed I would look for a position that was both, but I was nervous about following the model that I saw at UCLA. It was very scary. I mean, the faculty members looked so busy all the time and stressed and overwhelmed. I'm thinking, okay, well, I want a decent job, but not like, what I'm seeing with my faculty members. I was sort of scared of the model that I was seeing. So my husband and I, who's also an academic, we knew we wanted decent jobs, but nothing really high pressure. We had to publish, so we didn't want anything like Michigan or anything. That's what we would tell people. Not like Michigan or anything. Because that was in our mind the model of the super high pressure, publish university. But when we went on the market and we both applied all over, he's a political scientist, I'm a psychologist, we applied all over. We actually had a couple of joint interviews in some of the same locations. But Michigan just seemed to be the best fit for the both of us. I mean, it's comprehensive, which is why I do like it. But not only even in terms of the teaching and the research, but just in terms of the content, because it is so large. There's a little bit of everything. A lot of the other research universities, sometimes they specialize and they only do this kind of psychology or only really focused on the brain or whatever. But Michigan has a little bit of everything. So it was really nice to have that. So we both chose here, and it worked for my husband as well. So it was both a couple match, but also a personal match for each of us. And then what was the second part of the question?
Like some of your more general duties.
Oh, general duties,
what
yeah.
your day looks like.
So I've been here now 17 years as a professor, and what I do from day to day has changed. You know, when you're an assistant professor, you're sort of trying to learn the job. You're spending a lot of time prepping classes. It takes forever to write a lecture for the first time. And spending a lot of time trying to write my lectures, get my lectures written, my classes set up. You know, it's a lot of effort, a lot of work. And in research lab, you're getting that set up too, but the classes took a lot of time to get that going. But then, of course, as you go a few years, the classes are set and you're just tweaking them, and you're spending much more time in your research. And now that I'm, old and down the road, I probably spend a lot of time research, a lot of time mentoring, and a lot of time in service. As we get more and more senior, we're on committees, we're running this, we're running that. So now it's teaching is I kind of go and do it as secondhand, but a lot more time with research and service, mentoring the graduate students, running some of the grad student committees. A lot of where I spend my day, but I love it. But it's just different than when I first started.
Thanks, Amar.
Hi, how many people are in engineering here?
Yeah. We should have started with you.
All right, good.
Everyone else is sort of nodding and just waiting to get to you.
I'll speak to all of you as an engineer. How about that? So, I'll just say like what my story was. Like I did my grad studies in electrical engineering and bioengineering here in the College of Engineering at U of M. When I was finished, I was doing some teaching here. I was doing research. I realized that I really loved the creative aspects of doing research, and this was important to me because I was trying to figure out why do I want to be an academic? Like, why do I want to go into research? Is it just about, how much of it is like the prestige or the ivory tower thing of being an academic, and how much of it is really me, like what I want to do day to day? And that's something that I really think you should ask yourselves. And I'm telling you guys this because I finished in 2008, so I remember what it's being like to be a student and like transitioning into that kind of career. So I ended up getting 2 offers when I finished. I applied to a lot of places. I got 2 offers. One was a very nice postdoc at a national lab at Sandia out in California, and the other one was his faculty position at Wayne State. And to this day, it was the hardest decision I've had to make in my life. Like, we're talking like I was going out for like, I was out walking for several hours a day just like thinking about it, and I just couldn't make up my mind. The reason why it was such a hard decision for me was because I felt like there's so many aspects, and this is not to scare you guys, but this is just the truth, what it was for me. I felt like there were so many aspects of my life that were going to be determined by my job decision. The reasons why I ended up choosing Wayne State, number one, I actually thought it might actually not be a good idea to go that route with this very prestigious fellowship and then try to climb the ranks to like a top 10 university. I have my family in Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. This was a big part of the decision for me. My dad went to Wayne State. I have uncles in the area, family in the area, brother living in Ann Arbor. So the personal life of it, actually I wanted to be able to do the things I love to do while maintaining some type of work-life balance and the things that are important to me as a person. So that was one of the reasons I chose Wayne State University. But enjoying research, it didn't just have to do with this work-life balance thing. It was important to me to find a place where I could be able to do my research well. So the reason I ended up choosing Wayne State was because they had the facilities to do what I wanted to do. The things that were important to me was that I was going to be doing work that kind of spanned the electrical and bio area in the areas of micro nanofabrication, micro nano devices. So I needed an institution that had a clean room, a micro nanofabrication facility, and I needed an institution that had good collaborations with the medical school. Wayne State's it's not as large an institution as Michigan is, but as many of you who are here know, it's relatively large. There's about 30,000 students. They have about $200 million of research expenditures annually. So about, in the College of Engineering, about 20 million annually. So it's a pretty good sized research institution. The medical school brings in a ton of the money there, and they are the largest single campus medical school in the country. The thing I noticed when I interviewed there is that the medical school faculty there liked working with people in engineering. Some of the things I noticed, like I've talked to other colleagues at top-ranking institutions. Sometimes there's, you might agree with me or not, that sometimes there's a little bit of a territorial aspect of like, there's so much pressure for you to be at the top of your field, the upper echelon, the star in the field, that sometimes it actually, people become a little bit careful about collaborating with others because then the work becomes diluted. What I noticed at Wayne State is because it's not like a top 10 university, but rather like top 50, top 50 to 100, there's a spirit of collaboration which I liked. That spirit of collaboration was not just about research, but just in the way that people interacted with each other. Because the mentality there was, well, we need to work together in order to get these grants. Those were the reasons I ended up choosing to go to Wayne State. They had a clean room and microfabrication facility, which most universities that size did not. It just happened to be like a nice coincidence that they happened to have it. So if they didn't have that facility, I probably wouldn't have gone there. And they had the med school that liked to collaborate with engineering faculty. So these are the things that I was looking for.
Great, thank you. So I think we might all agree that an important first step in starting a lab is either identifying a new project or new question or perhaps collaborations. So what advice would you have for new faculty in identifying new project ideas or collaborations as well as sources of funding? Monique, would you like to start?
Oh, sure, I'll start. So for getting started with a new project, one of the recommendations that I had and one that I pass on is that ideally you want to spend that first few months, 6 months, it may take a while to get your lab up and running, in terms of equipment, and it just takes time to get new things started. So coming with data is the best way to come. Either your dissertation papers, maybe your dissertation is broad enough that you can get several papers out of it. You could be working on those papers. If you're coming from a postdoc, you're coming with that data. Ideally, I say to my students, try to collect more data for your dissertation than you need for the dissertation. So you can write your dissertation and get that paper out, whatever, but then still have other projects you can be culling and using while you're getting your lab up and running and getting a new project started. So it's good to come with data, come with projects, and those should be the first ones you should get out. You should always sort of work on papers and projects that are closest to getting done before other projects that are sort of just getting started. So that would be my first recommendation, is to come with data if you can. And then for collaborations, I think a good suggestion is you don't necessarily want to continue collaborating with a lot of either your former advisor. It's nice to sort of try to make a break if you can to show your independence. Sometimes you're still working on papers together, which is fine, but you want to start fresh if you can. I think collaborating with junior scholars is a good way to go because they're under the same sort of pressure to sort of try to get papers out and make a name. So either people from your current lab who are at other schools, maybe you guys could work together on a project. It's from the same lab. You went to Wayne State, you went to Iowa State. Maybe together you guys can work on a project because you came from the same lab, so you might have some interest. So that might be a way to go. Other junior colleagues or even junior colleagues at your current institution, I think are good collaborators. I know my husband, for example, found a great collaborator when we first started here at U of M, another fellow junior assistant professor, and they did a lot of projects together. And that way they could help each other. Each name was on each paper, and it sort of doubled the output without a senior scholar. So there's none of that sense of, oh, but so-and-so is really driving the work. But the two of them are junior working together, so it really helped them. I was so envious, kind of, I collaborate with my graduate student, which is great, but you're sort of teaching the graduate students how to do research versus two junior scholars who already know what they're doing and are motivated to get papers written because you're going to get tenure. So coming with data, coming with postdoc data, and collaborating with a junior scholar, to me, are my two suggestions.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the coming with data is really important from the biology side as well. During the last year of my postdoc, I sat down for a couple of really heart-to-heart conversations with my postdoc mentor about, well, here's where I am in the project here in this lab. What aspects of it are you willing to let me run with as my independent research? And, what kind of resources could I use from this lab in my own lab? And so we really talked it over and made sure that I knew what kinds of things were mine and where I would not be in direct competition with a person at Duke. So that was really important to come with that in mind. And then in the summer, where right before coming to Eastern, I was sort of wrapping up and writing the last of my postdoctoral research, but I was also already beginning the writing on an R15 grant proposal to the NIH. So you need to figure out what kind of support is good for your next step, and begin as early as possible on the writing to get that funding. It takes a long time to get the writing done, to get it, passed around to lots of people for looking at and ideas, and then submitting, and then you wait another whole year while it works its way through the NIH, and you might finally get funding 2 years later. You want to really start early on both of those. So yeah, so the coming with data, starting early on the grant proposal writing, both of those, really important.
Amar, do you have
Yeah.
anything you'd like to add?
Sure, I'd like to add, like, one of the joys of collaborating with other people is the kind of friendships and, like the common knowledge that you start to learn together. So like when choosing a collaborator or finding a collaborator, I would suggest, like, think about like whether you have common, not just interests, but like common passions and where you want to take the field. And it could be that you have the same set of skills, but it's better if you have two different skill sets to push the field forward separately, like in the case of like medicine and engineering. Sometimes you can build a device that will help this researcher do the types of assays that they want to do, which is the case with me. So my successful collaborations have been where I just make the device and the person uses the researcher uses the device, and together you're able to make like a new study that was not possible before. I want to also add to what Monique said about at the beginning as an assistant professor, it's very important that you have some grants as an independent PI to not just establish yourself as separate from your advisor in the research community, but also it's important for tenure for you to have single PI grants. If everything is a co-PI, sometimes, depending on the institution, that can be looked at negatively. And final thing is, actually, there can be collaborations which may not be beneficial to you, and learning how to say no in a good way, in a positive way, I think is very important, because you do have a limited amount of time, and what can happen is if you try to say yes to everybody, then you just won't be able to put enough time into the project, and you'll make everybody unhappy. It's happened.
Great. I see there was a question here. Go ahead.
So I have a couple questions, but I'll just ask the first one. But from my experiences and observations, obviously, like, managing a lab is not something you learn in grad school, right? Especially as it relates to the people interactions. So are there any strategies to how to manage a lab or the people in your lab, right? Delegating tasks and letting go, because you get more done when you can be efficient or efficiently use the students. Like, are there any strategies to utilizing students in your lab?
So I'll just reiterate the question in case others couldn't hear it. So your question is about how to both efficiently delegate and work with other people in your lab. And I think we can wrap that into where we were going next, which was about mentoring of either undergraduate students or graduate students in your lab. So if any of you have thoughts about that. I might also interject, we were going to have a Q&A session at the end, but by all means, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll just address it then. So.
Yeah, sure. So I currently have, I said there's about 9 in my lab. Usually I run somewhere in the range of a couple master's students and 6-ish or so undergrads. And I have found that setting expectations early has been really important. Telling them how many hours a week that I expect them to be in lab. They actually, for me, I have them sign up for credit. Eastern has a course for undergraduate research, which is convenient. So I can actually hold a letter grade over their head, and to get the A, you are here 10 hours a week, and they set a schedule for me, and as with all lab work, it never really quite fits the schedule, but at least I tell them in the beginning, tell me when you're not on the schedule, otherwise plan your lab work to be on the schedule, and that way I and my technician know what's going on, and I'm very on top of it. I've also found that assigning 2 students to a project has been good for me. I actually started out differently. I started out in my first couple of years having every student do their own individual project, and lots of different projects that overlapped but weren't the same. And I found that at least with the undergraduate timeline, I was not producing research fast enough. And also there wasn't as much interaction as I thought there was among sort of overlapping but not the same project. And I found instead what's working better for me right now is if I need to say, we need 30,000 colonies as this mutant screened. Well, your job is to screen 15,000 and your job is to screen 15,000, and you should all work together on putting the data together, and we'll put it together and both of you will analyze the data set separately and compare conclusions. That's been much better lately. One other tidbit that I've learned is about moving people out of the lab, which is tough. So sometimes there's a clear conflict. I do ask students when they join my lab that they commit to at least a calendar year. So assuming that we get along and things are good, I want to have enough time to both train you and get something out of you, right? Otherwise I just spend all this time training and you go away and I start over. So I do require a calendar year potential commitment from all of my students, so 2 semesters in the summer. There's been a couple of students that clearly could not manage the load. They either weren't interested enough or didn't, or they were overcommitted. And that was a really tough conversation that I had to have with a couple of them, and said, I don't think this is working out. I need to open up space in my lab for students that have more time, and I think that this isn't a good fit. That was really uncomfortable. I can't say that I did it really well. I talked to other people in the department about it, and I was not the first to have to go through this, and so I got some advice. But with that kind of situation, I guess just be aware that you do need to move people out sometimes, and that does happen. And again, I would ask for help from colleagues in the department, because you won't have been the first that had that problem. Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I found that managing a lab, like transitioning from being a student to actually managing grad students, is it's a learning process, and I'm still going through it. So my students have actually found out that I switch my policies like every year. 1 year.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, to make it up as well.
You do.
One year it was group meetings every week. Then the other time it was like group meetings every 2 weeks. Then like no group meetings, just individual meetings. And then it turned into like let's chat on G-Talk like every day. I'm really trying to see like what works best. I can tell you a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages to some of the things I've tried. Group meetings are great in the sense that they can create synergy, and the other group members can hear what your other group members are working on. The composition of my lab is usually like I have like about 4 PhD students, maybe like 2 master's students, and several undergrads working on like a very diverse range of projects. One of the issues that I found with the group meetings was that because I'm working on such a diverse range of projects, the students in one project have no idea what the other students are talking about. It's both good and bad. They're learning something, but at the same time, sometimes it's so much out of their expertise, they're sitting and their time is being wasted, and all the students' time is very valuable. That's actually, someone told me that's the most valuable resource you have, the students' time. So then from there we went to like group meetings every 2 weeks, just so, and the reason I started doing group meetings like that was more as a way for people to get practice presenting, because I found it when I started doing just individual meetings, the presentations at the conferences were suffering because they didn't have enough experience presenting their work. So you want to have your students regularly presenting their work in a formal way so that you can get feedback on that. That was the advantage of having like the group meetings every once in a while, where one student in the group would like have like a long, like a conference talk, like 12-minute talk, 5-minute Q&A, something like that. Then I found like the students liked to they like to have more interactions with their advisor, because a lot of times they're in the lab, they have a lot of questions that need to be answered. Says, okay, I'll keep the chat window open, like whenever I'm at work or when I'm at home, on my phone, whatever. So whenever they have questions, quick question, they just ask me on chat, and I can reply to them right away. It's less overhead than replying to an email. What was the last one? Those are the 3 things I've tried before, like
Individual meetings?
Yeah, thank you. Individual meetings is what my advisor here at Michigan did, and I found that actually works really well, because sometimes you need to have hard conversations, and you can't have those in the presence of other people because you don't want to embarrass a student, or sometimes a student has issues with the thing and they need to bring it up in private. And you can keep the discussion a lot more targeted towards a project. You're not worried about other people sitting and scratching their heads or getting bored. you can keep it very focused on the thing. So you might find, actually, I would encourage you to like experiment with the things on your own and see what works best. Sometimes a combination of everything, which can be confusing for your students, but
I've done the same experimentation.
Yeah,
We have
no,
tried this,
it's,
tried that, settled on something else. Yes, yes.
don't just do what your advisor did. Find what works best for you.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. I mean, being a mentor, both for undergrad and grad students, is kind of like being a parent. I mean, we kind of know what we had, you know, so you kind of know how you were raised and everything. Like, I should go do that. But there are lots of different ways to parent. There are lots of different ways to mentor. So I think it is good to talk to colleagues, other, you know, senior colleagues, to get a sense of what the strategies are. I kind of do a combination of the things you mentioned. I hold weekly lab meetings with the group so we could hear what's going on with different projects, share, practice job talks, all those things. And I hold individual one-on-one meetings with my students. I usually have a combination of about 4 to 6 graduate students, a couple honor students, RAs. RAs I don't meet with. The grad students meet with them. But it's a lot. So I'm still struggling with that because it's just a lot of time to do individual one-on-one meetings and a weekly lab meeting. But I do find that the students get a lot out of it. They really do, because in the individual meetings they can talk and share, maybe go over their projects, and then in the group meetings you get to hear everybody else, and it's a nice collaboration. You had mentioned about what kinds of people. I would definitely, you really have to sort of, in terms of mentoring, you have a general philosophy, but sometimes you have to tailor it to individual students. I mean, some students need a lot of, you know, hand holding, and some people, you know, you have to be there for every little thing. And other people want you to back off, and you can get a feel for that. You know, some students only need to meet every other week, you know, or once a month or whatever. So I ask my students, what do they think they need? You know, sometimes when they're starting a project, they'll need weekly meetings, and then once they're kind of going on their own, okay, I'll just check in once a month or whatever. So you could have a general strategy and then tailor it to individual students. In terms of who to bring into your lab, you really have to sort of trust your gut. I mean, when I have interviews with everybody that I want to bring into my lab, undergrad, RA, or whatever, I sit down and interview with them, and I get a feel. Usually at the beginning of each semester, I'll interview a group of students, or beginning of each year, I'll interview a group of students and then invite a few to be in my lab. And I can get a feel right away sometimes during those meetings where, is this somebody that I can connect with, or that seems interested and motivated, or they're just trying to pass the time. I remember one girl in one of the interviews, she kind of sat there the whole time, just sort of chewing gum and twirling her hair, and I'm thinking, I don't think no. So you do have to trust your gut when you meet with people and whatnot, both grad and undergrad, as it's going to be a kind of person I can connect with and feel comfortable, you know, having play with my data.
Great. Were there any other questions along those same lines? Did you have another one that was?
Yeah, but I won't.
Okay. All right, we'll hold it till the end. We'll come back. Okay, so another important part about starting a lab is the negotiation process of trying to identify what your startup package will be, if you need other considerations. So Amar mentioned like a specific space that he needed, maybe you need a greenhouse or access to common facilities. So maybe what are some concrete pieces of advice for negotiating that piece, and maybe also if there's anything that when you got there you thought, oh man, I didn't think about that, and sort of the heads up aspect.
Okay.
You want to start? You haven't gone first.
I don't think so.
Sure.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I guess I'm speaking more to the engineering field. I mean, typically to have a lab, you're going to need to buy like all these pieces of equipment, and so the advice that someone gave me, and that I didn't take completely, I should have, is that ask for a lot more than you need. You know, when they're gonna ask you to assemble a list of, in engineering, they'll ask you to assemble a list of equipment that you want to buy, along with the prices for each one. Now, like your instinct might actually be, okay, I want this university to hire me, so I'm just going to be, you know, I'm not going to ask for too much. It's actually better to ask for more, and the department chair will tell you that later, because the money from the startup is not coming from him. It's actually coming from the Office of Vice President of Research. They have much deeper pockets, as you'll find. So they're requesting a faculty line. Once they have the line, the university already knows they're going to hire them. And once the startup package comes in, like if it's too much, they'll actually tell you to cut it down a little bit. But they won't be, unless it's astronomical, they won't be offended. But in terms of the actual process of doing it, go into your lab and things that you want to do, and actually spend the time, learn what every piece of equipment does in your lab. You may have only used like a subset of all the equipment that was there, but go and learn everything as much as you can about each equipment. Ask your lab mates. This is something I wish I did, but I ended up doing like offloading it until later. finding out what each piece of equipment does will not only help you in the startup package, but it will actually help you in your research too, when it comes time to writing your specific aims for your NSF proposals and things like that. You know, get quotes for new equipment, and then when you actually go there and join, you can end up buying a lot of used equipment.
Yep.
I don't know if that is, did any of your advisors ever buy stuff off eBay? Okay, yeah, see? And that's here too. That's what advisors with deep pockets end up buying a lot of stuff, equipment off eBay and LabX and all these used equipment dealers. Because if you're doing a diversity of projects, you may not have the ability to buy a diversity of equipment. Like the startup package that I got at Wayne State, it was great in my opinion. But then like when I got there, I realized there's a lot of stuff I need to buy. And so I started buying like all like used lab equipment, and that actually served me fine. I was actually able to buy a lot more stuff, and if something actually goes wrong, which it has, not actually that much of the time, surprisingly, maybe only like 20% of the time, it more than made up from the fact that like I could buy things at like 60 to 80% discount from new equipment. And if you can buy more gadgets, then you can actually do more interesting projects. And just more specifically for the engineering type of things, I would say like instead of buying like a piece of equipment that can do like one specific task that's oriented towards one thing, see if there's a similar piece of equipment that can be used for a range of tasks. So instead of buying a signal generator that's oriented towards just microwave circuits, see if you can look a little bit more broadly and find a signal generator that's just a general purpose one that has the same set of specifications that you could actually use across a broad range of projects.
I can dive in. Okay. Yeah. So I would say that Eastern is just a bit different in terms of thinking about startups and funding, and it's because it's this comprehensive regional institution where we're primarily undergraduate. So although research is required and expected, we don't get giant startups, and you don't actually even have necessarily your own individual lab room space. What I have is a bench in a shared lab space, it's glorious. It's 14 faculty that are all in molecular biology, in biology and chemistry departments, and we all share the big equipment. So the ultracentrifuge, the real-time PCR machine, all of those pieces of equipment, we have one or maybe two, and the 14 faculty that are in this room all share it. It works great. So when I was on interviews, instead of thinking about what I needed in terms of buying it on startup, I was making a checklist in my mind as I was going past, as they're taking you on the lab tours. Do you have one of those? Great. Do you have one of those? Great. And if they've got one, and then of course ask to make sure, are those all shared? So I bought one shaker, I think, and one freezer, and that was really it as far as equipment went, because everything else they had something of already, and so everything has been good. The startup then is also very small, right? So I think Eastern's, they offered me $20,000 for startup, and I negotiated up to $30,000. Little did I know that I was negotiating away any moving expense costs, right? So then later it became clear that what they had was a set pot of money, and I was just moving money around within it, which worked out okay. It was fine. The moving costs, I preferred to have it as lab monies than moving costs in the end. And anyway, so while there is some wiggle room, and it is funded partially by the department and partially by the dean's office, the pockets are not as deep. And so certainly negotiate, absolutely. But if you are looking at a comprehensive university like Eastern, realize that the negotiating is at a much smaller scale. Possible, but much smaller. Speaking of other negotiating, you might ask about that kind of negotiating from the next session in this room. Dr. Mariana Laporte is the person I negotiated with. So she can really answer your questions and give you the straight dirt on what it's really like to negotiate at that kind of school.
Yeah, thank you.
For me, coming to Michigan, at the time when I came, 17 years ago, they had quite a bit of money versus now, I don't know if they're as wealthy. So the startup costs were good, and they actually did ask you, so what would you need to be successful here? Give us a list, give us a budget. So I had to think about, okay, what would I need? What would my next few projects look like? I do a lot of survey research and research with kids, research with teens, research in schools, research with undergraduates. So it's not very costly. So I had to think about my projects, what did I need? I found it useful to talk to my advisors, my postdoc advisor, my grad school advisor, to get suggestions on how to negotiate for the startup funds. And also to think about other things that might not be apparent. They suggested things like travel money for conferences, asking for that if you don't get it as part of the being a faculty member, asking for extra money for travel, asking for money to hire research assistants, for the summers or during the year to help you get your research going. So I was able to work some of that in. They even recommended you could ask for money for professional memberships. Some of the societies are really expensive, and you want to join. And all you have to frame it all in terms of this will help me be successful. It's not just I'm asking for money because I'm greedy, but I need this $5,000 because it'll help me with X because it will help me be successful. And they hired you. They want you to be successful, so they're inclined to want to give you the money if they have it. So those are sort of other things to think about in terms of equipment and whatnot, but those are some of the expenses you might have.
I guess just to add to that, summer salary and reduced teaching load is something to,
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about, depending on like what
Thank you.
field you're in and which university you're going to. Just as an example, like in my startup package, I asked, they granted me maybe 2 years of 2 years of summer salary, and 2 years of reduced teaching load. Our normal class load at Wayne State is 3 courses per year, and they reduced it to two per year, so 1 per semester, which actually helped out a lot because at the beginning you're making your courses, you're writing research grants, and you're going nuts.
Yep.
Anything that the university can do to help you out is really.
No, it's a great idea. Getting the reduced,
teaching load,
yeah,
yeah.
to reduced,
Yeah.
even for the first year. In Michigan, sometimes we do the first semester for sure, but it's something to negotiate.
And that was something that, very negotiable at Eastern too. I negotiated that, got a really nice reduction in teaching load the first year. So.
So I'm on the market now looking at different institutions, and one thing that I'm thinking in the back of my mind is how might the institution where I select, whether it's a urban or a rural area or a real isolated college town, how might either the institutional type or the location influence my ability to recruit students to work in my lab?
Depends on what kind of students you're looking for. Because the larger the school, they often have a lot of students, like at Michigan. So even if it's a small, isolated college town like Penn State or something, they have probably a lot of students that you could probably recruit. The smaller college and isolated might be a little bit more challenging. But it depends on what kind of students you're looking for. What's your discipline? Education, okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's more size dependent too.
Yeah.
I have to say, I think more than rural or urban, I think it's the size of the school that defines how easy it is to find students. Yeah.
Well, I guess the question for you guys is, did you have any challenges recruiting students to work on your research?
No, I'm overrun with them.
No, I'm overrun.
Yeah, they
I
come
think
to
there's always students who will work on your research. I think the right question to ask is good quality students.
Yeah.
And that
yeah.
there's so many variables that play a role in that. Going from Michigan to Wayne State, Michigan being such a highly ranked school and it's such a wonderful school to be in. I had a bit of an adjustment period that I had to go through. That being said, I think there are good students at every institution. What you have to do is if you think about this in terms of a bell curve, right? At Michigan, the bell curve might be everybody's in this 85 to 100% range. In another institution, it might be a much broader range. So then you have to find those students that are ripe for research and find those gems in the haystack, so to speak. And it's not always the students that have the highest grades. Some of the best researchers that I've had in my lab were just people who just worked really hard and just had a genuine interest in the subject. And so those are actually things that you have to think about that you should consider too. Actually, I've found the awesome researchers who didn't have very good grades at all. They shined in the lab.
And as a junior, I mean, thinking about your question in terms of a junior faculty member, sometimes it can be a challenge when you first get to someplace before you've made a name for yourself. And how do you people don't even know? And if there are more senior people there that do anything similar, of course, everybody will come and work with the senior people. So sometimes it does take a few years to sort of make a name for yourself and have your research be known. But I forgot I was going to go with that.
But speaking of making a name
Thank
for
you, there you
yourself,
go.
let me pick up on that. So one of the ways that I made a name for myself, or at least, got the word out among students, is I talk about my research a lot in class. Any chance I get to say something about, and my favorite organism is yeast, and, and this ties into my research, and then they all know. And so that's been really good. That would be a great way to
I did recruit a
to
lot of
make
students
that
from
name
the
for yourself.
classes that you're teaching. It's definitely a good way to mention your research and
Yeah.
or advertise at the end of class. If someone's interested in getting research, come let me know. And so that's definitely a good point. Yeah.
It is. Works great.
Yeah, go ahead.
How much does the actual psychology that we to come from the examination process, which graduate school could be, to qualify, then you do physics and defense, then you're going into another 5 years of proving yourself. Doesn't that get tiring and exhausting? How do you deal with that?
Does anyone hear the question? After going through the whole process of being a graduate student and defending yourself and getting out, is it tiring psychologically to start all over again as an assistant professor having to prove yourself again for 5 years? You're assistant professor, right? All right, good.
Yes.
Let's tackle this one.
Short answer, yes.
I feel like it's so
Yeah.
long ago. I don't know if I remember now. You never forget. You never forget the assistant professor.
It is exhausting. I mean, like for me,
Yeah.
like I had to put a lot of the other things on hold, to kind of like focus on the work. That being said, one of the things I was sort of grateful for is that you have a flexible schedule and you're doing something you enjoy. Like being able to do something that you have fun working on, and that's something that excites you, is something that you actually realize that a lot of people who have other jobs, like they don't have that, and that makes the exhaustion a little bit more manageable. And you might work like 60 to 80 hour weeks, but you can choose which 60 to 80 hours a week you want.
That's the
that's
running
like a-
joke in academia.
Yeah.
80 hours a week, but you get to pick which 80 you want.
Right.
And I can, it's tough, but like being able to like choose those hours makes it a little bit more manageable. You guys can probably add.
And I think your enthusiasm comment is right on. I felt, yes, it's tiring, but I did feel like when I had the job offer in hand and I was starting this job, I'm like, all right, I got the job I wanted. And I get to do what I want to do. I get to start my own research lab, and I get to teach classes in the way that I want to teach them. It was really exciting. So yeah, it's a ton of work and there's a lot of hours, but the excitement overrides it, or at least it did for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would agree. I mean, I think I hadn't thought about the starting over. It's like being a freshman and starting all over again kind of thing. I don't know. You start so much in survival mode. I wasn't even thinking about that. Okay, because you do have sort of 5 years, make your mark, go. So you kind of just start in. But it is what you're saying. I'm finally doing what I want to be doing. So it's a combination of everything that I love. I love writing, and I get to do that. And I love teaching, I get to do that. And I love research and science and working with numbers, and I get to do that. So it is that passion that you have to survive in this job that drives you through. And I know sometimes my students think about the work and how it's exhausting and how I'm working 60 to 80 hours a week or whatever, and I wish I should just go out but any professional job, if you get any professional job, they keep thinking that other jobs are just 9 to 5. Well, any professional job, if you're a professional lawyer or a doctor or investment banker, you're going to be working 60 hours a week. Any professional job is going to put in those kind of hours. But at least we get to do it with things we love, creativity, flexibility. You're your own boss. You get to be your own boss. So they're telling yourself what I'm going to work on next, what I'm going to write next. I mean, so it's just the flexibility that all those other jobs that are also working 60 hours a week don't have. So you just have to sort of keep and then of course if you get tenure, then you have a job for life, but they don't have. So you have to keep those benefits in mind to sort of drive you through it,
And having something outside of work to kind of help balance things is also important. For me, it was like I made sure I went to the gym every day, and I saw that that seemed to help me keep more focused on work too. And so like taking the time to actually do something else can help you work smarter, more efficiently, or come up with ideas.
Any other questions? Okay, so kind of playing off this idea of there's a lot of work to be done, and although it's exciting and you all are very enthusiastic about it, are there any maybe concrete ways that you might suggest to help them protect their time for maybe writing or research or teaching? Like how do you divvy that up? Because it seems like there's a lot of things that have to happen all at once maybe, or so are there strategies, I don't know, like a great app that has helped you, or maybe just a philosophy of how you sort of divide your time?
I guess I'll start. One of the things that you'll find is that once you're managing teaching your own classes and research, the teaching has such immediacy because it's the next day. You're going to have to go into the classroom the next day or turn those papers back or whatever and stand up in front of all those students, and so you spend a lot of time preparing for that because it is so immediate. It comes the next day, there's these concrete deadlines. So then one of the things that we found as assistant professors, I was lucky to start with several other assistants, we tried to find ways to work in deadlines in our research because it's so easy to put research aside because it doesn't have that kind of it's due tomorrow kind of feel. So we got suggestions from a group in the business school. They had started this writing sort of accountability group. So we started one. We had a group of about 4 other assistant professors where we would meet, was it every 2 weeks, I think, and set writing goals. And you said, in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to, even the simplest thing, whatever you think you can do in 2 weeks, but just to keep you accountable. And we would write these goals down. And then if you did fulfill your goals, whatever they were, write the intro of this paper or whatever, then you had to put $20 in the kitty. Just hold yourself accountable. And we borrowed it from the business school friends, and they were doing $50 in the kitty. We're like, oh, we don't think so. So we put $20 in the kitty, and then eventually we just started to get stickers, whatever. But it was just it sort of make you accountable. So that may be a good way to go. Meet with other assistant professors, sort of set goals, keep each other accountable, make research with a deadline and accountability like teaching does. Because teaching will consume you if you let it. But you have to sort of give yourself that space for research. The other thing I find is that now I try to set aside a whole day where I don't schedule anything, and that is my writing day. So I don't even come in, I don't put anything on my calendar. Sometimes I put a giant X on it, so I don't set up any meetings. Because it's so easy to, I need to meet with so-and-so, I'll put it on Thursday. But no, Thursday's my writing day. You have to sort of make sure to carve out a day or whatever for yourself. When I was doing the assistant professor years, I had young kids. And it was brutal. I guess we'll get to that next. It's a challenge. So it was like, 4 to 7 in the morning were my writing times. And it was just, so you have to try to just carve out the space when you can. Now I can actually do a whole day, and it's so exciting. But I don't know what
You're right about the deadlines. Yeah. I found that out in my first few years that I was not writing up the research at the rate that I should in order to get it published. You realize, oh my goodness, there are 3 projects that have enough data that need to be written up, and holy cow, tenure is coming. So suddenly I'm in writing, crazed mood. And I wish I'd been better in the first 3 years, say, of the assistant professorship, of setting concrete deadlines, like teaching deadlines about that. So I can't say that I did that. I wish I had. I'm still going to be okay, but it wasn't very fun this last year or two, making up for that, basically.
I think you guys said it really well. If I can add one thing, when I started off, my brother gave me this really good book. It's called Advice for New Faculty. It's by Robert Boyce. And the lesson that I got from that book was this idea of spending he called it brief daily sessions, where you set out 15 minute time periods. It could go a little bit longer, but not much longer, 15 minutes, where you set up a bunch of those and make sure at least one a day, and you make sure that you're writing something, that you're doing something. And the reason for that is because, that I found, at least from the experiences I've had with it, is that good ideas actually take a long time to percolate. If you have that grant deadline, and I agree with the deadlines are the best way to motivate your research as well as your writing if you have grants coming up. But if you do it all the last week, your mind's going to be so filled with the anxiety of trying to finish the grant in a week your mind often comes up with the best ideas when it's relaxed. If you start like really early and you just get in the habit of like spending like 15 minutes a day just like brainstorming ideas or writing something down, maybe it could be like the phrasing of how you want to word your grant to have the maximum impact. We're just like thinking of like an idea. You might think of an idea one day, and then the next day something else will build on the idea that you thought the day before. Basically, I'm saying like some of the percolating ideas takes a long time. And the slow and steady approach is better than everything happening in this like moment of inspiration right at the end, right at the end of the race,
Mm-hmm.
So that book talks a lot about it. I think it's a good read.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I think that everybody probably starts this new job wanting to be successful, maybe thinking even about what success looks like. But I'd like to ask you, how do you define success in your lab? And maybe how has that definition changed over time? Or maybe it has not.
Should I
Amar, do
start?
you want to
Yeah.
start?
Yeah,
Sure.
that's
I guess
right.
since I'm still an assistant professor, I define it mainly by the typical metrics, like how much are we publishing, like how are the students, are they presenting things well at conferences, are they, are they graduating, are they learning? I'm starting to see glimpses of other things too, and I think probably Monique can probably speak to more of that. Like getting a synergy in the group, I think is very important and sometimes understated. Having the students be able to work well together actually makes the productivity like much better by leaps and bounds. Having two people work together on a project, I found out, is actually a really good thing. They motivate one another.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, in the end, like the important thing for the students is to make sure that they have publication, make sure they have like a record that they can stand on that will help them get the jobs later that they came to grad school to do.
I think you're right. I'm kind of with you. I define success pretty traditionally right now because of the tenure stuff. So getting external funding from the NIH was a big one, and that was good. Getting publications, we got that. The lab culture, I'm working on it. I would really like to. Yeah, I would really like to include that. I recently set up a sort of a mentorship with somebody in chemistry whose lab culture I admire, and have been talking to her about what happened there. How do you get this culture of hard work but fun and people being around the lab all the time? Yeah, so that's in development, I think.
Oh, I think they cover
You're good?
everything.
Okay. Okay, so now we've got some time that's specifically set aside for any of the questions that you may have brought to the session today that we didn't go over, or if any of their comments sort of made you think of another question. So, anyone? Yeah, go right ahead.
What happens when you don't get tenure? You went those 5 years, you broke your back, and then you don't. What are your options? What can you do? Can you still go to another university? Do you
Sometimes.
then have to go through that whole 5-year process again, or is it modified? What happens?
I've seen it happen a few times, both for faculty that were at U of M and didn't get tenure, then moved on, and other of my husband's graduate students who are other places didn't get tenure. I mean, it is tough. It's emotionally hard and devastating, but then people sort of turn around and get over it. I know many of the people that I know do get jobs at other universities, because usually you have the even extra year there, so you go on the market or whatever. People get jobs at the universities. And that you may have to do, depending on the sort of the level of the university or what they want to see in terms of teaching. I suspect they might hire you work there for a year or two, and then you can go up for tenure there. I don't know if they hire you as an associate professor with tenure. You maybe have to show them a year or two of what you can do, teach for them. But I know people who didn't get tenure but got jobs elsewhere and are happy and are loving their current jobs. So, I mean, it isn't the end of the world. It's devastating in the moment, but most of the people I know who has happened to have, moved on or doing faculty jobs just at a different university.
Or maybe a full-time lecturership job or a research associate type job where it's not your tenure track faculty position, but another position within the university. That happens frequently as well.
Yeah. And if you're coming from a top university and you don't get tenure there, people are kind of understanding, oh yeah, you're at Stanford, it's hard to get tenure there, so, you know, other people might be open to hiring you because they know how challenging it is to get tenure at University A. So I think it depends on where you are and where you're coming from.
Sometimes people find out they're happier outside the university.
Yeah.
You know, I heard from a colleague, like, one story, like, you know, this guy, he was at an engineering school, he didn't get tenure, and then he ended up getting, he just got a full-time job with Intel, and he increased his salary by 50%, bought a nice house, he came back home from work at 5 p.m. every day, and he's happy, you know?
Yeah.
It's not,
Right.
you know, it doesn't have to be the end of the world.
Uh-huh.
So I'm starting my third year of PhD in electrical engineering. So I have a question about some advices for graduate students after becoming a technology manager. So is there any advice or something that you wish you could have done during your graduate studies for like research or doing research or teaching or writing a research proposal as a faculty? Is there some knowledge or skills that you might wish you had cultivated with your graduate students?
Maybe from an engineer might be.
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to speak to that.
Going, you know, having been here at the university, I think CRLT, like what they're doing with their seminar series is fantastic. Like getting that perspective is very important. Getting some experience teaching as a grad student is important. My advisor was over at NSF my last year as a grad student, so he actually let me teach the class and myself, and that was a really unique experience. I felt like very lucky that I was able to do that. But if that kind of thing is not possible, like if you're a GSI for a course, ask if you can do a lecture once in a while. Most of the time you'll find out that they'll say, yeah, sure. Do it on this day because I'm at this conference at this day. And just doing one or two of those things will really help on the teaching aspect of things. If you can get involved in proposal writing, even small parts of it, it's great because you get that flavor for not just what you're doing, but actually the greater scope of what it means to the rest of the world and how to sell that idea. And ultimately, like a lot of engineering proposals are like you're acting as a salesman, you know, and learning that skill of being the salesman is just as important as being able to think of unique ideas.
And I would definitely agree. I think getting any kind of grant writing, watching, proposing, helping an advisor with the proposal, all those experiences I think can be very useful. I wish I'd done that as a graduate student, and I didn't. And I was actually a little too independent as a researcher as a graduate student. I wish I had branched out more, collaborated more with either other graduate students or different labs, or just sort of saw a broader world. I was kind of set with my advisor in my one lab, and I wish I had seen more while I was a graduate student, you know, collaborated with somebody in another lab or just gotten more experiences. So I definitely would recommend it. Try to get as broader research experiences as you're allowed. I think is really useful.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. You know, getting a taste early of the things you think you want to be doing later. Trying to dip into teaching and dip into proposal writing and just really getting your feet wet and everything is important.
Yeah, so hearing each of you talk about setting up your labs, it seems like you had some sort of checklist, like I need such and such equipment, I need so many students, and I need to complete such projects in order to get going. Where did you go for help to know just what exactly that checklist should be, what should be on it?
In terms of like what equipment you should buy?
Like equipment or tasks you need to complete either in order to get tenure or to complete in order to get your lab fully functioning and running.
Yeah, I actually, my process with that was pretty disorganized, I'll be honest with you. The checklist, I threw it together in a weekend and I didn't even have like good, like, you know, good quotes in terms of how much it would cost. I just gave like very rough, you know, rough things. It just all happened very quickly and I don't know, maybe I'm not the best person to ask for that, but in terms of like how I formulated the projects and what I was going to do, I got in the lab and I started like putting together the piece of equipment and starting some of the, setting up the facilities that I had at my other university. I had a few ideas of proposals that I wanted to I had a few ideas, proposals that I wanted to write to NSF. And I asked myself, okay, what preliminary data do I need to show to them to prove that this idea is feasible? And just started working on that set of experiments. Once you start from somewhere, you'll start having ideas. The ideas will just start rolling, and it'll be more of a situation where you don't have enough time to do all the ideas you have, rather than the other way around. Whereas like a lot of time we fear that we're just going to run out of ideas. It seems, I don't know, for a lot of the people that I've spoken to, it seems like that doesn't happen. It's the opposite one.
I did make a semi-organized checklist of things as I was in the summer before leaving my postdoc lab. I actually went around with a piece of paper and wrote down every piece of equipment in the lab, even little ones, you know, like, oh, picofuge. Yeah, I should probably have a few of those, to just remind myself of all the stuff that I would need in a basic molecular lab. And then I went online and just checked prices and made a list. So that was semi-organized. The planning on projects, that I did while I was grant writing. So as I'm writing this proposal to the NIH, I'm thinking about, okay, how big should this project be? Where would I divide it into tidbits for undergrads? And then gave some thought to which project could I most easily start in my first year, which is the simplest one, which is the one that I could get up and running the fastest. So it was in the process of grant writing that I, in a sense, made that checklist for projects.
And for me, I just ran by my former advisors. I said, hey, what would your dream list look like? And so I work with them to sort of help put together a list. Excuse me.
I have a question to the forum first. So I like the idea of taking friends with you and starting a new lab. And I think it's important. But the question is, as a PhD student and working on dissertation, it could be overwhelming. And it's very hard to find time or even have the scope of writing a different proposal or extending. So what's your
I might just say the question. So his question is that as a PhD student, there are a lot of things pulling on your time, especially your own research. So how do you sort of counter that with the need to maybe try to write a proposal, or do you build some of these other skills?
I think the process of writing a proposal helps your PhD research. When you're doing your experiments and your advisor says, like, I need this data by this date, that's fine. You got to get that done, right? But like what your advisor is seeing, your advisor is seeing the whole field, and he's seeing how your project fits into this larger scheme of things. Like what is its contribution to the field? And like, when you start writing the introduction section of your thesis, if you already know, if you have learned about what that broader perspective of the field is, ultimately, if you'd spent the time doing that, which is often like, like reading some review papers, getting involved in proposal writing, it actually will, in the end, it might actually save you time, because getting that perspective is actually probably the biggest leap from being a grad student to being a PI writing grants and trying to get money. And so it's helpful to actually start building that perspective while you're in school, I think.
I think one flows from the other, absolutely. As you're writing your dissertation, there should be ideas springing from it that you would be thinking about spinning off into a proposal. And you've got all this great background now, you understand the field where it stands, you have ideas about where you want to take it next. So writing the dissertation should, I think, spur the ideas for the grant proposal.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
So I think, and you said, and I guess also, Amir, that when you were looking for schools, you said you didn't want like the top tier research school, but the general feeling that I've been getting is that the non-top tier schools still expect the same from you as the top tier schools, but they give you less resources. So is it actually...
That's not true. It sounds true. At least at Eastern, the research of expectations, although I'm expected to devote, say, half my time at it, I'm spending a lot of time with students more than I am actually putting papers out. So when it comes to the papers that must be published, Eastern requires, say for example, in your 5 years, 2 peer-reviewed publications, which is a lot less than Michigan does.
Total over the 5 years?
Over the 5 years. Yeah. So even though they do expect you to to find your funding and get your feet on the ground and train students, the actual number of publications is smaller. So I would say that the time spent is significant, but the output expectations are different. Yeah.
I think the expectations are different in terms of like the things that you get judged on at tenure is like at least at our institutions, how much money you brought in, how many PhD students did you graduate, number of publications that you put out, and then like your you know, whether you have good teaching evaluations and some level of service to the university. Those levels will vary, and you won't get a straight answer out of anybody. Like the question that like I always want to ask is, how many dollars do I need to bring in to get tenure? Never got a straight answer out of anybody. There's all these like rumblings, there's estimations, and we don't have a fixed policy on that. But if you look at, if you have friends in academia, like ask them at like different tier institutions, ask them how much money they had when they had tenure. Just look at the faculty's website at the institution that you're seeing. How many publications do they produce per year? And look at all, like the entire range of faculty, not just one. And you'll get an idea of like what the tenure expectations are, because they wouldn't be there unless they had produced to that extent. Like for Wednesday, I think like one to two journal publications per year is fine. I also have like a lot of conference papers. They expect at least one NSF grant that's a single PI. They prefer multiple, if that's possible. And they expect like some maybe some collaborative proposals as well. So typical size of an NSF grant maybe 300,000 per grant, and then if you get two, it might be like 600,000. I'm just giving you just like some very general numbers for places like U of M. I've heard. Don't quote me on this. It's on camera right now, but I've heard some places, like some engineering schools, like they say like getting like $1 million of funding will put you in good shape for that. So there's a huge range. There's a huge range.
Okay, well, if we can all join me in thanking our panelists.